Hey guys, today we're going to do part 2 indoors for our found material weaving unit. Welcome to Fibers with Miss Robinson. Like we talked about last time, there are 3 parts to weaving. You're going to need loom, warp, and weft. These are our 3 parts. If we were in the classroom, we would have this set up. But let's talk about some other options at home. First, let's start with looms. Looms are simply to hold your warp in place. They can come as a tabletop loom, as one that you sit with, or as a frame, something that looks just like a picture frame. Now let's talk about warp. Warp is the thread that's attached to the loom. It holds the tension while you weave over and under. Now let's talk about one way to create a loom at home. Thin cardboard works just fine. I have a lot of this from packaging of foods, so I've been using this. I just folded the edges back to make a rectangle and then taped them. If you have thick cardboard, just cut a rectangle. 6 by 9.5 is what I ended up with. It can be a little bigger or a little smaller. So in order for your weft to not lay flat onto your loom, you want some space in between your weft and the loom. So I've made some spacers. I just cut some thin strips of cardboard, and because it's so thin, I want to double it or even triple it, and I just layered it with glue and then used some kind of clips to hold it together. Paper clips would work, chip clips, these are clothespins, anything works like that to let it dry overnight. Now let's talk about weft. Weft is anything that you're going to weave in and out, back and forth, over and under your warp. I was trying to figure out what I had at the house that I could use, so these are some options. Anything that's string-like, t-shirt yarn, rolled newspaper, regular yarn, and you can even cut strips of cardboard like I've done here. So of course I had plenty of t-shirt yarn. If you're interested in learning how to make your own t-shirt yarn, there's another video on this channel that I made showing you how to do that. And I've got a few more projects that are coming out with how to use the t-shirt yarn. Now let's talk about warping the loom. So for warping the loom, you need to cut little notches. And what I've done is I've measured about a 1/2 inch spaces, and I put a mark. The inside of my scissors are going to be stronger. The point of my scissors are not as strong, so I'm going to use the inside of my scissors to cut the notches in my loom. Materials from the weft can also be used for the warp. I wanted to try rubber bands, and so these rubber bands would have worked if I were going horizontally, so if I went the horizontal direction, but they were a little too short for me to go the length of my loom. And you can see I'm having a little bit of trouble because they're older rubber bands, and so they broke off. And so I would try another one. I did end up getting a few of these to work as my warp, but I later figured out that a better option was going to be fishing line. So if you don't have anything else, you can use rubber bands, but let me show you a better option. This is some fishing line that had gotten tangled around my husband's fishing rod, and so what I did is I saved it because I had to cut it off. And so what I'm doing is I'm sliding it through, and I'm leaving the tail on the back and then taping that down really well. And now I'm just going to wrap all the way around in each notch. I'm going to the next one as I go around the loom. You want to be careful that it stays flat. It will try to pull because of the tension that you're creating. It'll try to pull in. You're going to work your way down the rest of the loom until all the notches are filled with your warp. Same thing, I'm going to leave the tail on the back, tape it down really well, and then for my weft, I chose to use t-shirt yarn. I had plenty of it, and it just seemed like a good option. You might want to cut a nice size piece of it off to work with at a time, and then add as you go. I'm going to show you how to do that. What you're going to do is you're going to go over and under your warp string whatever you start with, I started under, you're going to do the opposite next. So you can see it goes over the next string. I'm going to pull all the way through until I have a tail about the length of my hand. And now I'm ready to come back. And so I have to go around that end string. You can see on the way there, I went under the end string. So I'm going to start over. Every single time you got to check, I was over my end strings, now I'm going under. You've got to check that you catch that end string. Otherwise, it's going to come all the way out. If it does that, you know you didn't catch the end string. So I ended up redoing my warp. I wasn't happy with the rubber bands, and so I just redid the warp with only fishing line. And I'm going to continue weaving back and forth, over and under, over and under. If you make a mistake, if you go under 2 at a time, just pull it back out. It's easy to fix. If you need to start over, just pull it all back out. That's what I love about weaving. It's super relaxing, and it's easy to fix. As you're going, be careful not to pull too tight. So now let's talk about changing colors. There's 2 options. One, you're just going to leave a tail the same way you did when you started. I'm going to leave the tail of the blue, and then I'm going to weave the gray in and leave the tail of the gray. I'm going to show you what to do with these later, but that's one way to start a new color. I'm going to continue weaving back and forth, being careful not to pull too much on the edges. I like to make sure that my warp stays straight up and down. So sometimes I tug on the ends to make sure that it's lined up. Now let's talk about the second way to add string. The second way is to tie them together. You're going to lay the 2 ends together. You're going to go around your finger to make a loop, and then both tails go back through that loop. I like to pull them tight toward the end of that tail so that I get as much yarn to weave with as possible. So now let's talk about that knot. I'm going to weave back through, and wherever the knot falls in between 2 warps, I'm going to press it to the back. So I'm going to tighten it up a little bit and press it to the back to hide it. Then I'm going to continue weaving, and that knot will stay in the back. Now that I'm done with my weaving, it's time to take it off the loom. So for this, you want to take your time and make sure that you do it correctly. You're going to flip over your loom to the back, and you're going to cut 2 strings at a time. With fishing line, it's very important that you make sure it doesn't slide out the other end. So keep your finger on it as you're pulling it out. Pull it out tight. And then I tied it 3 times to get it to stay. You're going to deal with the next 2 strings. Pop them out. Tie them 3 times. You're going to work your way all the way across, tying them 3 times or 2 times, 2 at a time. If you have a third one, just add it in to one of your bunches that you're tying. It's not a big deal. Sometimes you're going to end up with an odd number. Like I said, it's very important to take your time with this. If you have kite string, that might have been a better option just because it doesn't slip so much, but you can definitely use fishing wire and it works. So now it's time to trim up the ends and to hide the tails. You're gonna take your scissors and cut the end of your fishing wire. I left about 1/4 of an inch tail or 1/2 an inch tail. Just trim those up. Then you're going to take your tails and you're going to weave those back through on the back. I turn over to the back and I'm actually going to wrap around some of the loops on the back. I'm going to stay to the back because you won't see it on the front if you do that. You can see that I'm going to tuck the tail under some of the loops on the back, and what I did is I just wrapped it through, and then when you've done it 2 or 3 times, you're going to just trim it off. Continue the process until all of your ends are hidden. and then you are ready to use your coaster or whatever you have made. I hope that you enjoyed this weave-in project, and I hope that you will try it at home.